Have you ever just wanted to, like, escape?
Yeah.
Just leave the real world behind and step into a place where magic is real?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Well, right after World War I, that's kind of what happened in Britain with this whole Cottingley Ferries thing.
Yeah, it was, I mean, can you imagine
Yeah.
a whole country trying to pick up the pieces after a war? You know, everyone's looking for a reason to hope, something to take their minds off of it all.
Right.
And then, bam! These photos show up, and it's like they prove that there's magic hidden all around if you just know where to look.
It really is like something out of a fairy tale, right? These two young cousins, Elsie and Francis, they live in this village, Cottingley,
Right.
and they're running around saying they see fairies by the stream.
And the adults are all like, oh, kids and their imaginations, right?
Of course.
But then Elsie, she's like, what, 16 at the time?
Yes, 16.
She borrows her dad's camera.
She knew a little something about photography.
Exactly. And she takes a picture that ends up, well, the whole country's talking about it.
It's Francis. In the photo, she's only 9, and she's surrounded by these figures, all delicate and glowing fairies.
It's an amazing photo.
Even Elsie's dad, and he was an amateur photographer himself, even he couldn't figure out how she did it.
You have to remember, back then, photography was still pretty new.
Right.
There was this feeling that if it was in a photo, it had to be real.
People weren't so quick to, doubt a photograph.
Exactly. So naturally, word gets out about these fairy photos and
It explodes.
it spreads everywhere. And it's not just everyday people who are interested.
No.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle,
Sherlock Holmes.
the one and only, he gets wind of this.
And Conan Doyle was really into spiritualism at the time, especially after, losing his son in the war.
He was looking for, like, proof, you know, something to show him that life goes on after death, that there's more to the world than what we can see.
And these pictures, for him, they were like proof.
Exactly. Proof of fairies and proof of the spirit world. He was so serious about it. He did his own investigation, even talked to the experts over at Kodak.
Wow.
And he decided, yep, these photos are the real deal.
He was so convinced he wrote an article about it.
In the Strand magazine?
The same magazine that published his Sherlock Holmes stories.
I know. And, him publishing that just made the whole thing even bigger.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone was arguing about it. Are the fairies real? Was Conan Doyle just, caught up in his grief, seeing what he wanted to see?
Or were Elsie and Francis just really good at playing tricks?
Right. And that's where it gets even more interesting. Elsie and Francis, now they're in their 20s.
They're adults.
And they're caught in this mess they created.
Their little prank just blew up way bigger than they ever imagined.
Exactly. And Conan Doyle, well, he's totally convinced. He's showering them with gifts, attention. He even gives them new cameras so they can take more pictures of the fairy.
I mean, can you imagine?
Oh, it must have been wild at first. Their little game, it's capturing everyone's imagination, even someone as famous as Conan Doyle.
Right.
But then, it probably started to feel uneasy.
Yeah, a little scary even.
How do you come clean when you fooled everyone, especially someone you admire?
Right.
Plus, they'd be the laughingstock of the country.
So they don't say anything.
Nope.
And to keep Conan Doyle happy,
Right.
they take 3 more pictures over the next few years.
And the last one, fairies and their sunbath. That one is strange. Even today, people wonder about it.
The fairies in it, they almost look see-through.
Yeah. Even photo experts can't figure out how they did it.
Some people think they used, like, double exposures or darkroom tricks.
Yeah, but others, they think, maybe, just maybe, there was something more to it.
More to it than just paper cutouts and hat pins?
Maybe. But before we get into those later photos and what the girls eventually said,
Right.
let's go back to that first picture, the one that started it all.
Yeah. What was it about that photo that made people believe? And why was everyone so ready to believe in fairies back then?
Good questions.
What do you think?
Well, when you look at that first photo, it feels so innocent,
Yeah, there's this dreamlike quality to it.
It's like it captures like pure childhood imagination. You know what I mean?
It's like a simpler time.
Exactly.
Before all the war, the factories, all that.
Yeah. And remember, this is way before TV, before the internet.
Right.
Before we were all just bombarded with images and information all the time.
People had to use their imaginations more.
They did. They relied on stories, folklore, all that stuff to understand the world.
So fairies living in the woods wouldn't have seemed that crazy?
Not at all. It would have fit right in with all the stories they'd heard growing up, all those myths and legends.
Passed down for generations.
Right. And then on top of that, you have photography, which, like we said, it had this kind of power,
It seemed more real.
It did. It wasn't just a picture. It was like proof, evidence.
So you can see why people would believe.
Especially if they were already open to, the supernatural and all that.
It was like finding a missing piece to their puzzle.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about the fairies themselves, right? It was about what they represented.
Yeah.
That connection to nature, the magic, the wonder.
The belief.
Yeah.
That there's more to life than what we can see.
Exactly.
It's like those photos gave people permission to believe again,
Permission to, embrace a little fantasy, a little bit of magic in a world that was becoming all about science and logic.
Is pushing the magic out.
Yes. And I think that's a big part of why we're still fascinated by the Cottingley fairies today.
Still talking about them over 100 years later.
Right. They represent a time when maybe the line between what's real and what's not, it was a little blurrier,
More open to the impossible.
Exactly.
But there's the other side to the story, of course.
Right.
The girls, they eventually confessed.
Yeah.
Admitted they faked the photos.
Paper cutouts and hat pins, that's all it was.
It came out, what, like in the 1980s?
Yeah, decades later. And people had mixed reactions,
Some people felt betrayed, like their belief in fairies was, shattered.
Some people thought it was just a harmless prank that got out of hand.
But then there were those who, even after the girls confessed, they still believed.
They still clung to the idea that maybe, just maybe, there was something more to it.
Especially that last photo, the sunbath one.
That one's so strange.
The fairies in it, they almost look see-through, like ghosts almost.
Even Frances, one of the girls, she always said that photo was real, that she really captured something magical.
Interesting.
So what do you think? Was she just messing with everyone? One last little trick?
Or did she really believe it?
Hard to say.
It adds another layer to the whole story, doesn't it?
It does, and it makes you think about belief itself,
Yeah.
Even when there's evidence that something's not true, we can still choose to believe it.
If it gives us comfort.
Right, if it gives us a sense of wonder, a sense of meaning.
That's powerful.
It is. And in a way, the Cottingley fairies, even if they were fake, they teach us something about belief.
What do you mean?
Well, they show us that belief is often shaped by what we want, by our desire for something more, something beyond the ordinary.
So we see what we want to see.
Yeah, even if it means ignoring the evidence that says we're wrong.
Because sometimes believing in something, even if it's not real, it just feels better.
It does. But they also show us that there's something beautiful about wanting to believe, about being open to the possibility of magic and wonder.
Even if it turns out to be an illusion.
Exactly. Because isn't life more interesting that way?
When we can imagine, dream, see the world with a little bit of that sense of possibility.
It is, even if it means getting fooled sometimes.
It's a balance, right?
It is. It's a delicate balance. But it's a balance worth striving for.
So what can we learn from all this, from the Cottingley fairies?
Well, maybe it's this. We should approach the world with curiosity, with a sense of wonder, but also with a healthy dose of skepticism.
So be open to the extraordinary.
Yes, but also be willing to question, to look at the evidence, to consider other explanations.
And to remember that sometimes the best stories, the ones that really stick with us,
The ones that capture our imagination.
they're the ones that blur the lines between what's real and what's not.
Right. It's like that Picasso quote, art is a lie that makes us realize truth.
I love that quote.
Me too. And maybe, just maybe, the Cottingley fairies, they were like a form of art,
Revealing a deeper truth about our need to believe, our desire for enchantment.
I like that. That's a beautiful way to put it.
And it's a truth that's still relevant today.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially now, with all the information overload, the fake news, all the images and stories fighting for our attention.
It can be overwhelming.
It can. In fact, the Cottingley fairies, they're almost like a warning.
A warning?
Yeah, about the dangers of believing too easily, of not questioning what we see and hear.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's almost like they were a precursor to the age of deepfakes and misinformation.
Right? Back then it was fairies. Now it's all these manipulated photos, videos, stories.
Designed to trick us, to make us believe something that's not true.
Like our own modern-day Cottingley fairies.
And just like Conan Doyle, we can fall into that trap, of wanting to believe something so badly that we ignore the evidence that says it's not real.
Confirmation bias.
Exactly.
So how do we avoid that? How do we not become modern-day Conan Doyles, blindly believing everything we see online?
That's the question, isn't it? Well, I think it comes down to, like you said, not believing everything you see. Back in 1917, People were captivated by those fairy photos, thought they were real. But today, we're flooded with so many images and so much information, and it can be just as deceptive.
Yeah, it's like we're constantly surrounded by our own Cottingley fairies.
Right.
Photoshop pictures, videos that are faked, stories that are made up, all to get us to believe something that's not true.
And it works because, just like Conan Doyle, we all have this tendency to want to believe things that fit with what we already think, even if it's not true.
Right. Even if the evidence says something different, we can be so stubborn.
Stubborn and also, just overwhelmed. There's just so much information out there. You can't possibly check everything.
So what do we do? How do we avoid falling into that trap?
Well, I think we have to learn to be a little skeptical, like Conan Doyle was when he was solving his mysteries.
You mean channel our inner Sherlock Holmes?
Exactly. We need to be asking questions. Where did this information come from? What's the evidence? And be ready to change our minds if we find out we were wrong.
So be critical thinkers.
Yes. Don't just take everything at face value. Just because it looks real or sounds convincing doesn't mean it is.
The Cottingley fairies are a perfect example of that.
Right. A bunch of pictures, carefully crafted to look like something magical, when really it was just a clever trick.
And that desire to believe, it can be a beautiful thing.
Oh, absolutely.
But it can also make us vulnerable, make us easy to manipulate.
So what can our listeners do to be more savvy, to not be fooled?
What's the takeaway here?
I think the most important thing is to be aware of your own biases. We all have them, and they can really affect how we see things.
So be mindful of that pull, that tendency to only pay attention to information that supports what you already believe.
Right. Get out of your comfort zone. Talk to people who have different viewpoints.
Even if you disagree.
Especially if you disagree, that's where you can learn the most, when you challenge your own assumptions.
And don't be afraid to admit you don't know everything. It's okay to be uncertain.
Exactly. Not everything is black and white. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just keep learning, keep asking questions, and refine your understanding as you go.
It's a process, right?
It is. And the Cottingley fairies, they remind us of that. Even with all the controversy and debate, they ultimately show us the power of imagination and the importance of thinking critically.
Approaching the world with a sense of wonder, but also with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Exactly.
So, to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, and never lose that curiosity.
There's still magic to be found in the world, even if it's not always what it seems.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the Cottingley fairies. We'll see you next time for another fascinating journey.